part 6 of the Mensteopathy informational introduction. Now, in the next stage of the Mensteopathy, we dive into the men's behavior, which stems from the white or shining knight in armor and the dark knight. In the retrospective of the good man versus bad boy in that particular notion. In understanding the proclivity of behavior in the human experience, we see where men learn their behavior and how this creates what then generates what is known as attraction for their mate, whether they be male, female, or so on. But in understanding the fundamental core value behind the aspect for the man to find his mate, you now realize the particular yin and yang, if you wish. Which, if you are the bad boy, she will see you in a positive light. And if you are the knight in shining armor, the white knight, she will see you in a negative manner. The problem now is in the attitude men have as young men, in their impulsiveness. We lack patience as men. And because of this lack of patience, we build what is known as our hunger. We want it. We want it now. And because of this hunger is where we see the lack of patience resulting in our impulsiveness, which then results in our lack or our poor decision-making ability. Because of a poor decision-making ability, we then seek impulsive dopamine fixes, whether they be through the use of different forms of addiction, through the different proclivities at which you were then given your behavioral point of orientation through all of your behaviors. But you as a child or a young adult, as a young man now, must realize one particular thing. If your role as first creation in the earth, the garden, is not to just guard the garden itself, but woman and child as well, it means you now have a slightly higher cause you have to answer to as a man. Does not mean you are of a higher power over woman, but in your own conscience, you see a higher power which gives you what is known as your ego. And in the ego of self is the beginning of what is known as the egomania, jealousy, neuroticism, where because of jealousy, you create impulsive decisions based on this person has this, that person has that, I want this, I want that, because I want to build my flock of feathers to attract a mate, if you wish. So I can shine and be all shiny when I step out. If you wish. To mesmerize the mate you wish to attract. But in the impulsiveness of that behavior will result in the relationships you then pursue. In the idea of understanding your patience now, you must realize that just as any kingdom, if you wish to build something that lasts, you need to give yourself time to build that flock of feathers, if you wish. When you begin to appreciate life at a higher level, you then see that there is a more deeper rooted experience in the appreciation that in the hypersexuality of women was specifically created based on the impatience of man. And when we as men realize that the hypersexuality of not just women but our very daughters are as a result that other men have created impatience, which result in themselves having to think this is where they seek and find love. And now when we see the correlation of the two behaviors, where do we find the root cause? At temptation. And when you find temptation, you arrive now at the beginning where you realize where the little devil and little angel are speaking to you in your own vocal resonance, in your mind. Imagine a circumstance or a place in your life now when you are faced with a step back, a pushback from the external world, where all of a sudden you think to yourself, I don't want to do that. That seems difficult. And then you think again, and that second thought is what is known as virtue. The first initial thought is what is known as temptation. But if you were to learn to appreciate or think again and listen to the second thought, you would then realize that you can identify temptation and virtue speaking to you anytime you are faced with a particular dilemma which has caused you a step back in your particular progression in life. The moment you experience a step back or a moment of a discipline, the true moral compass now relies on where do you tend to base your decision off of, temptation or virtue? Because ultimately, this is what makes you as a man have the ability to find the woman for your life. When you are of a more virtuous value. And the virtue is of a harder path. It's easier to be tempted, to give up, to give in, to fall. The virtue is the act of rising above the temptation and saying, I will continue to move forward. But in the idea of moving forward, you cannot move forward beyond the moral compass of the virtue. Because if you do so in a manifestation to manipulate virtue, well, then you enter a psychopathic nature of sorts where you see a slight derangement. And if we see that in our children in this present day, it might be as a result of the medications or supplements of chemicals we are giving them through their treatments for their education, such as ADHD medications, resulting in a change in their neurochemical transmitter pathways, giving different perspectives. The moment we change a physiological process, we begin changing a psychological process. And if you change the psychological process, you change the physiological process, the process of the body. known as behavior. And so, as a man, as a young man, a part of the Mensteopathy is learning what it means to be of a virtuous value. And from learning what it means to be of a virtuous value, you will then see that the change in the attractiveness of your mates, whether they be of male or female and so on, you will see now that you have changed the approach at which you begin the pathway. And in a different pathway attracts a different mate. Where do you see the fork now? Because in your approach, you can be just as happy in any particular relationship you choose. The problem is not in the relationship you choose, it is in the behavior you act in the relationship. Because it is stemming from the moment you created a negative pathway. In order to fix this, we have to go back to the initial moment of creation, which is in understanding the fundamental first self, man, which from the temptation, man lost the ability to find a woman. He gained her for the night, but we were created from sin because Adam and Eve were never married and never made the commitment, which is a thing you learn in virtue, to take on a harder path together so that you may give a easier yet just as important lesson of life to your next generation so that they may continue your teaching, not just as father, but as mother of that particular family. Thank you.